Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Netroots Nation. For some of you, this is your first. For some of us in this room, it's our 14th or 15th. It is always great to see everyone and to have this incredibly important topic to discuss. My name is Adam Bonin. I am a board member at Netroots Nation and former chair. I practice election law in Philadelphia. I want to briefly introduce our panelists and then get right on the way with our discussion. I'm going to introduce them in the order that they will be speaking initially, but obviously, Anyway, Melissa Ryan is one of the real success stories of the Netroots movement, rising from the fabled Ned Lamont campaign of 2006 to a decade of work in digital strategy and fundraising to where she is right now at Card Strategies, which she founded, which focuses on disinformation, misinformation, and all sorts of bad stuff that happens online. She is the founder also and writer of the weekly Control Alt-Right Delete newsletter, which is absolutely essential if you want to understand what extremists and foreign nations are doing to try to disrupt our elections. And it is very much worth your reading all of the time. Next is Secretary Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State of Arizona. She is a social worker. She served in the Arizona House of Representatives and the Arizona Senate as minority leader. And now she is in charge of Arizona's elections. And it is quite a responsibility. Similarly, our friend Alex Padilla, no stranger to Netroots Nation at this point, has served as Secretary of State of California since 2015. Where, like Secretary Hobbs, his focus is on voter registration and participation. He too is a fellow state senator and has been in elected office since he turned 26 years old. So for many of you out there who are thinking about running for office and wondering if it's too soon, it is not too soon. And then our final panelist today is Patrick Murphy, who was somewhat responsible for my becoming an election lawyer in the first place. While he was he served as a member of the U.S. Congress from 2007 to 2010, and currently is a co-chairman of Vote Safe Pennsylvania, which is a bipartisan organization which is trying to protect the vote for all Pennsylvanians this year. And he is a cybersecurity specialist. But what I really want to do is tell the story about how he stood me up for a fundraiser at my house about a decade ago. And if we have time, we will get to that. But in the interest of time, let's start with Melissa. How bad is it right now? What are the threats that we should care about during this election?
Sure. So let's just start with the obvious, which is that the Trump campaign and the Republican Party are doing everything they can think of to sabotage and delegitimize the election. They are worried, with good reason, that they can't win a free and fair election. So they're doing everything that they can to stack the deck. Just this morning, as I was preparing for this panel, I came across a report from the Washington Post that Trump has personally attacked the integrity of this election 80 times since May. Pretty much all of those assertions were disinformation with no truth behind them. So my fellow panelists are going to be much better equipped than I to talk about the efforts Trump is making to actually suppress the vote before it happens. But we already know that a robust disinformation campaign from Trump and the Republican Party is going to be part of that effort. And frankly, we know how it's going to pay out. So unless by some miracle Biden or Trump scores a clear victory on election night, the plan is to challenge the legitimacy of the election and to sow as much chaos and discord as they can. Again, this is going to involve creating and amplifying a lot of disinformation. They have the apparatus to do it. And we've seen them do it in act. We're seeing them do it already. Many of you will remember that Trump had the same strategy in 2016. He refused to say whether or not he'd concede, and he complained about voter fraud and rigging with no evidence for months. And clearly they were trying to set up for being able to claim the election was rigged had Hillary won, which I think they believed was going to happen. It is on all of us, anyone in this audience at Netroots, to start countering this narrative now. We need to help prepare voters for the reality that the election night they're used to probably isn't going to unfold in the same way, that results might take days to calculate, and that doesn't mean the election is rigged. It's the process of ensuring an accurate vote count. And since this is Netroots Nation and y'all have a lot of social capital and influence, my call to action for you today is help spread the word now. Push back especially against media outlets who are running with the election night chaos frame, and pressure them to cover this in a more nuanced way. I think it's an easy and effective way to fight back against disinformation that we know is coming, and it's one where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Secretary Hobbs, what's going on in Arizona? And so everyone knows, what are your standards and deadlines on vote by mail? What should voters expect, and what are the things that you're concerned about as a Secretary of State?
Well, I think Melissa really summed up very well the challenges that we're all faced with in this election, and misinformation is really one of the biggest focuses of our office in terms of election security. We didn't expect to have to deal with it from the president. So I think that we have been focused on getting more people to vote by mail. Arizona has been a no excuse absentee voting state for decades. And so we have a long track record of that. In the 2018 election, 78% of the electorate voted by mail. And we expected to see that go up because we've been pushing more people to get on our permanent early vote list. And they did in the primary that we just held last week. 88%, around 88%, we don't have the final tally yet, voted by mail. So I think we are winning this disinformation war in terms of how we hold a safe election during a pandemic. Certainly those numbers illustrate that. And we have our vote by mail deadline, you asked about that, is 7 p.m. on election day. We did have a lawsuit to challenge that deadline. We worked with the plaintiffs to settle that lawsuit in the way that we think will be the least confusing for voters of our state. That deadline stays in place. We were worried that voters would have to actually take their ballot into the post office and ask for a postmark on it because they're not consistently postmarked when we utilize the bulk mail services. So the deadline is still 7 p.m. on election day, but we worked with the plaintiffs to put together a plan that is expanding options for voters to drop off their ballots other than by using the postal service. So we have drop boxes around the state. We're getting more. We just put an order, our office put in an order for $140,000 of new drop boxes for the state. And so we're gonna be really pushing all of those ways that voters can vote early.
That's great. I mean, I can tell you that it's a very different situation than what we have in Pennsylvania, where the Trump campaign has sued in federal court to block the counties from establishing drop boxes outside of their county board of elections. And so in Philadelphia, a city of 1.1 million registered voters, they want us to have one drop box during a pandemic, which is nuts. Secretary Padilla, tell us what's going on in California.
Right. Thanks, Adam. Similar to what Secretary Hobbs is saying in Arizona, California too, I think is fortunate to be taking steps to make it easier and safer to vote during COVID-19. But as you're sharing about Pennsylvania, it's a harsh reminder that every state's a little different. So in California, look, we're no strangers to vote by mail. It's been popular for decades. No excuse, vote by mail specifically. But we did take the step initially through executive orders and then through follow-up legislation to instruct counties to send every active registered voter a ballot by mail in advance of the November election. So that's going to be the first choice. And we're going to be promoting the heck out of vote by mail. Just to give you a benchmark, in our March primary, more than 70% of voters received a ballot in the mail statewide, and more than 70% of the ballots cast were by mail statewide. So, we have a good start, but closing that last 30% gap in a large state like California is still a big number. But people should not confuse this with an all vote by mail only election. We're simultaneously working hard to ensure we provide as many safe in-person opportunities to vote both on election day and before election day, trying to ensure there's early voting opportunities for people who need to vote in person for a variety of reasons. It's frankly offensive and insulting what we hear coming out of the Oval Office and other Republican leaders, frankly, standing in the way of providing more safe opportunities for people to exercise their right to vote. We've seen what can happen when it goes wrong, right? Go back to Wisconsin's primary, go back to Georgia's primary. It can and should be avoided with proper leadership, proper planning and preparation. That's what you're hearing out of Arizona. That's what we're trying to demonstrate in California. And I think by and large in most states, they're trying to do the right thing by expanding vote by mail, but you still have several that are resisting. And of course, the more than $20 million fund out of the RNC challenging these expanded voting options in states across the country. So we have our work cut out for us. And I'll close with this. I think I concur with Secretary Hobbs and Melissa that we have to begin to prepare now for what election night might look like. We're no strangers in California for it taking a few weeks to finish counting ballots. So I think most people should rest assured we'll have an idea on election night of the outcome of most contests. But for close contests, it's going to take at least a few days, if not potentially a couple of weeks. I know it's going to be a couple of weeks in California, and that's okay. That's the process at work because we're taking the steps to ensure that every ballot is counted as it should be. So we're protecting voting rights and don't fall into the chaos or the conspiracy theories that we know are going to be coming from you-know-who.
Thank you, Secretary. And Patrick, what are you seeing from your vantage point, both here in Pennsylvania, both in terms of the Pennsylvania issues and also just in general, in terms of the security of voting processes? Tell us what you've been working on.
Adam, it is simple. Our democracy is under attack. And it's under attack, frankly, from the White House. It's an honor to be on this panel, Adam, thanks, and Melissa, and to be on with two Secretaries of State, and really the Secretaries of State on this panel and across our country are on the front lines of our democracy. I mean, they're the heroes of our election system. And, in the words of, President Obama, we're the ones that we're waiting for because election security is up to us. And together, we have to fight for three things. First, funding. I mean, state and local governments have been hit hard during COVID-19. They can't rely on GoFundMe to secure our elections. And we need to demand from Congress more funding to make sure they can do our jobs because they're the ones that are on the front lines to make sure our fellow Americans can vote safely and securely. And it can happen through, obviously, the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, which provides essential grants to states. By the way, the EAC, that was put in place after Bush v. Gore by a Republican Congressman, Bob Ney, what was called HAVA, after that disaster. So we should learn from our mistakes. We should also expand safe voting options and educate the public. And, I'm proud of the work that we're doing with Vote Safe PA. Vote Safe is a bipartisan effort. I am proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with another combat veteran, Tom Ridge, a Vietnam veteran, who was the governor of Pennsylvania, who was the first secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. I'm a fan. I'm a proud Democrat, but I'm an American first. And to have Republicans like him say mail-in voting is safe and secure. And what we're seeing from the RNC and others in the White House is a disgrace. And frankly, a lot of people are arguing that it's criminal what's going on right now. And lastly, the attacks on the U.S. Postal Service. When we talk about funding, the president withholding funding, the sabotage mail-in voting is un-American. It's wrong. It threatens veterans. It threatens our seniors. It threatens small business owners and our electoral system. The second call to action, public expectations. Melissa and the others and the Secretary of State mentioned it. We might not know that, and we're probably not going to know the results on election night, but we have to let people know that's okay. We have to get it right. Adam Bonin mentioned, he got into election law because, I was going against one of Rick Santorum's proteges in 2006. I ran for congressman, came back from Iraq. I had lost 19 men in my unit. And I ran in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, And we won by 0.6%. I mean, the Philadelphia Inquirer said my opponent won that night. And, we won by 1,518 votes of the 250,000 that were cast. We have to get it right. And last but not least, we have to counter disinformation. I mean, what Melissa Ryan's doing at Control-Alt-Delete is hugely essential. I mean, we cannot stop the Trump campaign from spreading lies, and we have to, prepare to counter them now. I mean, and again, to quote her, an ounce of prevention is critical here. As someone who served our country, in 2 combat deployments, came back, was the first Iraq vet in Congress, rallied against the war in Iraq, co-authored the bill that repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, stopped torture when I was in Intelligence Committee, putting in the law that we can't waterboard people anymore. What we saw 4 years ago, in the words of the CIA director, General Michael Hayden, under President Bush, he said, what happened in 2016 with the Russian interference was the most successful influence operation in modern history. So we have to make sure that we keep our campaigns and our electoral process secure. We have to combat this foreign influence that we saw. We have, 2 PACs. We have the Kennedy Democrats and Taking the Hill PAC. We actually help these campaigns free of charge on cyber hygiene and doing things that need to do. And we support veteran candidates like Cal Cunningham in North Carolina, and great future members of Congress like Amy Kennedy in New Jersey. But we had to take stock of what's going on right now. It is a defining moment in our country's history. It was 55 years ago we had the Voting Rights Act. 20 years ago, we had Bush v. Gore. 4 years ago, we had Russian interference. And, we have to counteract the narrative of President Trump. And he's trying to sabotage this election every which way they can. And it's up to us as Americans to stand up and not take it anymore. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Adam, if I can just chime in for a second, Patrick is absolutely right on this debate about the integrity of our elections and vote by mail specifically. It is not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about voting rights. Right? During a health pandemic, we should be finding more options to stay safe and healthy and exercise your right to vote. That's what's at stake here. I'll defer to you, and when you want to get into a little bit of details as to why it may take a few more days or a couple of weeks to get final numbers, the processing and verification of vote by mail ballots, post-election audits, all the things that we want to ensure the integrity of our elections.
Sure, and we should talk. I mean, there's a lot to say about what the Trump administration is doing, and we should get back to that. But I do want to make sure that we touch upon at least a little bit, what the real nature is of a foreign threat to our elections, either in terms of disinformation pre-election, as well as interfering with voter registration databases or actual election results. I mean, Melissa, what are you seeing from your vantage point? And then I guess, for the secretaries and Congressman Murphy, what are you actually concerned about in terms of the integrity of the voting process?
Well, in terms of disinformation, we know that Russia and other foreign actors are doing their dirty work. The Russian effort seems to have morphed. So it's not quite the crude social media post that you saw in 2016. There's a lot of creating fake personas, fake think tanks, and pushing Russian state media articles through conservative media channels more. The other thing I'll say is, and I can't really speak to hacking efforts, so I'll rely on the elected officials for that. But I still, in terms of disinformation, I worry so much more about homegrown disinformation. because it is now acceptable to do through official Republican party channels. There are millions of dollars behind it between the campaign and super PACs. And just an example of the power of the domestic disinformation network, that video of the doctor in the lab coat that had the very weird views promoting the drug that President Trump liked, that was engineered by a Tea Party affiliated super PAC that did the press conference and then used networks they had built to amplify it. And it went viral in, I was offline that evening and I came back 4 hours later and this video had gone mega viral. And, that happened because there was so much Republican money and infrastructure behind it. So as we're worried about foreign disinformation, I hope it is not lost on us what our own domestic actors on the other side of the aisle are ready, willing, and able to do.
Do one of the secretaries want to chime in on this?
Sure. I think that since 2016, we have learned a lot, and we are in such a better position than we were in 2016 because we're expecting things. We have prevention things in place. And I feel really confident about our security posture going into this election. I just think that, as I mentioned previously, we are winning the misinformation war against vote by mail. And I think that we built combating misinformation into all of our plans. And so I think it's showing to be effective. One of the tools we're using is really working to make sure that folks are getting their information from trusted sources. That's a campaign that the National Association of Secretaries of State is engaged in this year, to really push out those trusted sources of information. And that's a really critical tool that we have.
Yeah, I'll chime in. And first of all, Adam, appreciate you distinguishing between sort of our voting infrastructure, our elections infrastructure, right? The registration databases, voting systems, separate and apart from the disinformation campaigns that we see, not just, but especially on social media. On the infrastructure side, and I'm sure Secretary Hobbs and all of our colleagues are daily reminding people that voting systems have to undergo testing and certification for use. We've made progress nationally, where about 96% of voters, I think, are going to be voting on a paper ballot this cycle. That's the highest it's been in a while. California, it's 100% paper ballots and a voter verified paper trail as part of our security requirements. We keep our systems offline, make it impossible to systematically hack or rig elections. Every county has to, conduct a post-election audit to ensure the accuracy, integrity of the results. So we have a lot of the policy framework in place to protect our infrastructure, even our voter registration databases, right? State-of-the-art firewall, encryption technology, et cetera. So my biggest worry, not to take that for granted, but my bigger worry is this misinformation and disinformation piece. 4 years ago, we were frustrated that the forces of the Russian government were behind all this. Even worse now, they're still at it. So are others, because of a lack of accountability for what the Russians did in 2016, and now being amplified by Trump. And so we have to work even harder to constantly correct the record and ensure those trusted official sources of information can break through. So everybody out there, please help us amplify. Go to your county elections office or your Secretary of State. Those are the official, reliable sources of information for voting and for elections. I put in the chat box for all Californians, hopefully there's a good number of Californians on here, all of our resources and tools at vote.ca.gov. On that site, one of the options is cybersecurity information, and specifically a portal where you can share with us anything that you think is suspicious or is flat out wrong on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Share it with us. We've developed protocols with the social media platforms for prompt review, and in most cases, removal of bad information online. So we're proactive, we're responsive, we're trying to get ahead of it all with accurate information when it comes to the disinformation, because people deserve to have confidence in the system. Last thing I'll share, just as another measure to have confidence in vote by mail, since that seems to be under attack right now. many states, at least in some local jurisdictions, have ballot tracking tools for voters. In California, we're going statewide with Where's My Ballot? Voters can sign up to receive alerts either by email, by text message, or by automated phone call on the status of their ballot in the mail, both on the way to the voter and on the way back to the county, including a confirmation. Imagine, Adam, getting a message confirming that your ballot was received and counted. It's great for transparency, great for accountability, and I think great for a confidence in vote by mail that voters deserve to have.
You actually just touched on something that I did want to get to, so let's talk about it right now. How confident are you, how satisfied are you with the steps that gatekeepers like Facebook, Twitter, Google, Instagram, etc., are taking to combat disinformation about voting?
Yeah, look, I think, frankly, it's mixed. They are taking steps, so that's a good thing. Are they enough? No. First of all, the consistency and thoughtfulness of the policies of what they will consider, misinformation, disinformation, et cetera, can be improved upon. We haven't seen a consistent, effective policy in place. The other is, unfortunately, they seem to be a little bit more selective on advertising, which is not a bad thing because that's been very damaging. But they are less assertive when it comes to erroneous tweets. The content of whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, starting with the president himself. So they've taken some positive steps. On the one hand, good news, for example, whenever Facebook does their voter registration reminder campaigns, we can see the needle move with our voter registration rolls. So that's good. It's not all bad, but clearly there's other things that are glaring that they need to improve upon.
And Adam, if I could this is Patrick, if I could just jump in, if you don't mind, on this. I think it's incredibly important. Obviously on social media, that's where we're seeing the Russian influence. It's where we saw it, according to the Mueller report back in 2016. And for the record, Robert Mueller, Vietnam veteran, combat veteran in Vietnam, served his country for decades in the FBI, and of course is still being attacked by President Trump. But in his report, laid out what happened in 2016. We are seeing it right now. And again, I serve currently, I ran the Army for President Obama as the Undersecretary of the Army and then the Acting Secretary. And in that election in 2016, when I was there in the Pentagon, there was over 600,000 troops and civilians overseas who voted. 2 years ago, 1 in 4 Americans voted by mail. And in this election, as Alex just pointed out, it's going to go over probably 50%. I know in California, Alex, it's all going to be by mail and paper ballots. But the reality of it is, when you see things in like Pennsylvania, where we're a battleground state, we actually have President Trump and the RNC suing the state. Adam, you're an expert. You've been involved in this case. We just had front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning talking about President Trump is sabotaging this election. His own Postmaster General sent a letter to our state government saying, hey, listen, the post office now can't basically fulfill our duties if you guys are still planning on doing the mail-in voting. They are purposely chipping away at our democracy. Think about that. This is not a partisan issue, for the record. I want to be very clear to the listeners. This is a American issue versus what is going on, this undemocratic action. I mean, this is like what we see in Turkey. Like this is not a regular democracy. This is like way beyond a city upon a hill on what we're known for. And when we have this disinformation campaign, I know this might make Melissa Ryan throw up her mouth a little bit, but I'm gonna quote the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation, as we know, I'm sorry, Melissa, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but they said, again, DC conservative think tank, they have said the claims of existing widespread fraud over approximately 250 mail-in ballots cast over the last 20 years. They studied this. They said they only found 1,285 voter fraud cases in all forms. That was just over 200 fraudulent uses of absentee ballots, according to their online database. Again, this is, and again, one case of fraud, prosecuted, no doubt about it. but they're trying to sabotage and dissuade Americans from exercising their constitutional right in the middle of a global pandemic. It's wrong, it's un-American, and we have to get after it.
There's a question for Secretary Hobbs in the hopper from Jennifer Miller-Smith regarding a community whose voting rights we don't talk about enough. What is the status of voting access on the reservations? I mean, especially during this pandemic. Are there court orders in place to ensure those rights? What does your office do to ensure that Native Americans have the right to vote?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. We have 22 recognized Indian tribes in Arizona, and there are varying degrees of barriers across the state for tribal communities to participate. And it's something that I was focused on during my campaign and have been since I came into office. So we have been putting significant resources into working to address a lot of these barriers that exist. And I think, they didn't come into place overnight. And unfortunately, we can't take them all away overnight. But we have made significant progress. We hired a tribal liaison, which is the first in the Secretary's office ever. And we have regular conversations with tribal communities to see what we can do to chip away at the barriers. We just had a call yesterday about voter registration. A lot of voting registration efforts to online, and our online platform is not adequate to address a lot of the issues. Lack of internet, lack of a printer, lack of having a state ID or driver's license, all those things. And so we're trying to come up with some alternative solutions that will help register more tribal members prior to this election. And we have longer term plans in place down the road. Unfortunately, not all of those things are going to be able to happen right now before the election. But one of the things that we are going to be able to put in place pretty soon is having the motor vehicle system be able to recognize address codes for folks who don't have an address or typically have to fill out the paper form and describe their address versus having an address. So that will happen in the next few weeks and be in place before the election. So that is removing one of those significant barriers. In terms of voting by mail is problematic in tribal communities, particularly because they don't have a lot of access to the mail. So we're using a lot of the CARES Act money that our state was awarded to specifically expand early voting in tribal communities. So more locations, more curbside voting, more drop boxes. Those are the things we're putting in place right now.
Cool. One of the things that we've been seeing in Pennsylvania, and this was our first go at vote by mail, is that Black and brown voters have less confidence in vote by mail than they do in voting in person. For a variety of reasons that we certainly can get into. When you look at that from your state's perspectives, what is the balance between sort of approaches to encourage people to do it this way during a pandemic, steps to just make voting in person easier if that's what people want to do? How do we look at this issue in terms of making sure that all communities are enfranchised?
Yeah. Well, look, in California, we clearly understand that. So this is not an either or proposition. I think the first choice and the first recommendation for people will be to vote by mail. It's the most convenient and probably the safest way during a health pandemic. But knowing California has a large and diverse population and a large and diverse electorate, we know there's people who will absolutely need or much prefer the in-person option. So we're going to be providing those as well. For folks who will be voting in person this November, be prepared for that different experience. It's not just your typical polling location, similar to going grocery shopping. It's not done the same way anymore. So signage, physical distancing, masks, sanitizers, PPE, et cetera, all the measures we need to take to protect public health while protecting our access to the ballot. Look, I agree. There's a lot of people who have said they've been resistant or hesitant, or there's a little less familiarity with vote by mail. So voter education in either case is critical, whether it's encouraging more people to vote by mail and strategic voter education as to why it makes more sense, and not just getting postcards from the Secretary of State's office, but really working in partnership with local community trusted leaders, kind of like we're doing with census outreach, and even for the in-person voting locations. You know, I know Katie and I and all of our colleagues have heard from our local counterparts that there's an additional challenge this year in both securing voting locations, right? Retirement homes and residential garages don't make sense anymore, and recruiting poll workers because a lot of the seniors and retirees that we relied on in years past aren't available this year. So, you know, while we're pushing vote by mail, we're simultaneously recruiting a new generation of poll workers to try to keep those in-person options available with all the safety measures that are required. So, you know, reaching all voters, especially folks who have just, you know, maybe voted less frequently or have been disenfranchised or prefer to vote in person versus by mail, to educate them about all their safe options to vote this November. Ultimately, the more people we can encourage to vote early, whether it's in person or preferably by mail, should mean shorter lines, smaller crowds, and a safer experience on Tuesday, November 3rd for voters and poll workers alike.
Okay. There's a question here for Melissa, but mostly, but also for you know, for anyone else who wants to chime in. What can individuals do to fight disinformation among their friends, families, and communities? What should people be saying online when this happens? What should you be saying to family members when this happens? What works?
Well, the bad news is not much works. And I want to be honest that during the COVID-19 pandemic, one thing we've seen online is a sharp increase in conspiratorial content, including pandemic conspiracies and also QAnon. And I can also tell you something that's terrifying is there is a QAnon cluster online and there is a mega cluster online, and you now can't really tell the difference between the two. So I think it's more of a challenge with family members and community members than it was a year ago. One of the few things that I have found successful and with my own family and other people have told me is successful is when you appeal to that person's self-interest. You know, is there something that it makes sense for them to believe that appeals to, that makes their own life easier or makes their own life better? You know, sometimes this happens automatically. Again, with the pandemic, it's, you know, someone I know got COVID. I think it's going to be a more difficult challenge with voting. But I think when you appeal to their self-interest of assuring a fair count and helping them find a way to vote securely and safely, that's probably the best option.
Does anyone else want to chime in on this? You know, in terms of, I mean, obviously for the secretary, you know, speaking from the platform that you have, presumably it comes with some level of credibility when you say that something is disinformation, or at least I would hope so.
I mean, I think we're all guilty of clicking on an article that a friend posts and it's from 1987, but there's no context for that. And it's just continuing to encourage people to make sure that what you're posting is relevant and current, and that there's context to it, and that any election information that you post and share, that you're getting it from those trusted sources of information, which really should be your election officials. And we're just continuing to pound that, those trusted sources. And I know that folks want to create a voter guide, or they want to, you know, share information. Just don't recreate it. Just point to our sites because it's all there.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Adam C. who wants to know, yeah, as a poll worker, what should he be doing to ensure that the voting process is safe and secure for in-person voting? And I guess just on top of that, what can we do to encourage more people to serve as poll workers on election day?
Okay. So I'll chime in here. Look, it's in my appeal with every group every single day. We're not just promoting voter registration, not just promoting make sure you get out and vote and all what your options are, but knowing that there is that need for additional poll workers for folks who are willing to step up and help maintain the resiliency of our democracy, we need more poll workers. Every cycle there's proper training that poll workers have before election day comes around, or before even the early voting starts, if they're working early voting. And so this year, it's not just the training of what to do as a poll worker or as a supervisor, but also the proper implementation of physical distancing and other public health directives. And we're supplying all the PPE in partnership with counties. So it will be part of the training and preparation before the polls open and the voters start walking in. I think if there's anything attractive other than your conscience and your civic duty beyond just voting, I know several states and several jurisdictions are announcing some creative, innovative new voting locations to replace the voting locations that don't make sense anymore. Just yesterday, Major League Baseball, the Los Angeles Dodgers were the first Major League Baseball team to announce that Dodger Stadium will be a vote center for this November's election. That comes on the heels of several basketball arenas throughout the NBA. LA Football Club is the first Major League Soccer team in California to announce they're hosting something too. So we're trying to get creative, both out of need, but also to try to maintain that excitement for this most consequential election of our lifetime.
Cool.
I think, Adam, that both the Secretary's points and to Melissa's point, all politics is local. So, when you have macro forces at play, like the Trump administration, and again, I applaud, I read about the Dodgers Stadium thing, and Alex, that's great. Us from Philadelphia, we like the Dodgers when Chase Utley was on your second baseman, but I digress. But what you're seeing, though, is President Trump and the RNC suing states like Pennsylvania to not allow those drop boxes so citizens can drop their ballots off, their mail-in voting off at local boxes, so they don't have to put it in the mail. And there, again, this is the constant sabotaging what's going on. But to Melissa's point, what can we do about it? It's incredibly important to just appeal to their better angels and to say, listen, whether you're Democrat or Republican, it's your constitutional duty to vote, to be a citizen, to be part of the process, and to let them know this is not a partisan issue. There are forces at play. There's foreign interference. They want a divided America. They want to sabotage us, and we cannot let them do it. No matter who wins this November, we at least have to make sure people don't stay home, that they have to go out there, or if they stay home, but they can still be part of the process by voting by mail or in person.
And finally, for poll workers, if it makes a difference in most jurisdictions, there's a stipend that comes with being a poll worker. In California, every county is a little bit different, but it's roughly about $100 a day. So if it's one day, not a bad chunk of extra pocket change. If it's for a 4-day early voting period plus the time for training, it can add up. And we know there's a lot of people that whether they're underemployed or unemployed right now that could benefit.
One of the questions that we have here from an anonymous attendee, which I want to broaden out because I've been asked this a lot, is, I'm sure you get asked this and I get asked this, what's the best way to ensure that my vote is counted? Do I need to show up and vote on election day? Should I, do I have confidence in the Postal Service? Should I use a drop box? What should a voter who is considering their options do?
I'll take that. We're really focused on making sure voters have all the information and then make the choice that feels right for them. We do have the ability for voters to, once they send their ballot back in, to confirm that it's been received by the election officials and that it's been tabulated. Maricopa County, which is our largest county, actually has an option where you can opt in to receive text messages that track your ballot. Not every county has that, and I don't know if every state that does vote by mail has that option. So that's a way to confirm and verify that your mail-in ballot was received back. So that's a good option. But if you're worried about the mail, then use a drop box, but really just make the choice that's best for you. Mail-in voting is as secure and safe and accurate as in-person voting. if we are, if we have the tools to make sure that the ballots are returned to the election officials. And we are doing everything we can to ensure that the mail stays accessible, but also there's alternatives if you don't want to use the mail.
And I'll just add a couple of items as well. In most states, you probably have the ability to go online and verify your voter history and see if your vote by mail ballot in prior elections or your provisional ballot in prior elections was received and counted, and if not, why not? So I know in California, you can do that under verifying your voter registration status, another one of the many tools at vote.ca.gov. In addition to that, like Katie said, if you're worried, you can drop it off in person on or before election day at any voting location in your county. I've already talked about the ballot tracking system that we're expanding statewide for this election, which includes those automated alerts that Katie mentioned. So plenty of tools out there, but you got to do a little homework and maybe proactively subscribe, not expect the alerts to come to you automatically.
Okay, but how, we started here, and I want to make sure we circle back here as we're nearing the end of the session. I mean, how worried should we be about the Postal Service? How much of what's going on is unnecessary and partisan panic, and how much of what you're hearing from the Postal Service really does frighten you in terms of their capacity and willingness to process all of these ballots and have them delivered in a timely manner?
Look, the way I'm describing it is, am I concerned? Absolutely. Am I panicking? Not quite yet, for a couple of reasons. First, before election day gets here, there's going to be two key points for congressional action. One, the next relief package, whatever it looks like, whenever that might be. And second, an appropriations bill just to keep the federal government functioning. And in both of those cases, there's opportunities for, we see resistance from the White House, we see resistance from the Senate Majority Leader. So all eyes on Nancy Pelosi to negotiate at a minimum the resource issue for the Postal Service, if not some actual, policy in there. But I do think that many states have policies at the state and local level to improve resilience. I'll give you two examples for California. Not the case for other states, but this can be a call to action to request it or demand it in your state. When vote by mail ballots go out in California, they go out early. Ballots start arriving in mailboxes about 4 weeks before election day. So counties know they got to send them out even extra early to accommodate for potential delays. Plenty of time for a voter to fill it out and return it. In California, the deadline to return your vote by mail ballot is not election day. We have the postmark +3 deadline that I mentioned earlier. So as long as it's postmarked on or before election day, we give it 3 more days under a normal election. For this November, it's 17 days. So, again, accommodating for any potential delays, trying to build resiliency into any service interruptions through the Postal Service. But every state's a little bit different. So find out the rules and make sure you keep that in mind when you decide when and how you vote.
Okay. We have a question or a comment here from Irving Negrani, and I think Melissa is probably most directed to you. Can we please remind people to use multi-factor authentication on their devices? How important is that in terms of avoiding hacking, both in terms of voters, but also in terms of campaign staffers, campaign volunteers, and the like?
Yes, 1,000 times yes. Use multi-factor authentication and basic digital security. I believe Netroots has a training on it for progressive organizers that Nick Catalano is giving. If not, look up his Medium post on it. I will say, as someone who has gotten the email from Google saying that Russia is trying to get into your email, that it can be a terrifying experience when you think you're getting hacked. But if, as a citizen and certainly as an advocate, make sure that you have two-factor on all your devices and you have basic digital security practices for yourself.
Okay. Secretary Padilla, I know you have to drop off a little bit before the session ends, so if you have any concluding remarks that you want to give before we go back to the rest of the panel, please do so.
Yeah, no, look, great discussion. Things will continue to evolve. Don't believe everything you hear coming out of the mouth of Trump. Do your homework, be prepared, vote early, spread the word, work as a poll worker, all of the above. It's the most consequential election of our lifetime. We knew that coming into January of 2020. The stakes are even higher now. And last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't make a plug for the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, the Secretaries of State that you know are fighting the good fight to protect and strengthen voting rights. Our website's in the chat box, demsofstate.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary, and let's hope you get an extra special election for a U.S. Senate vacancy to deal with in the near future.
We'll see.
We'll see about that. Okay.
Oh, I hope so too, but 81 days to make it happen.
81 days to make it happen. Patrick, what should our, all of our participants, what should the public be thinking about and doing in these last 81 days in terms of protecting the vote?
We really got to get out there and educate folks to be part of the process and really do that pushback on the disinformation campaign that's out there that is being amplified by foreign actors, especially with Russia right now. And they are trying to divide us as Americans. It's important that we get out there and let people know they have to be part of the process. They can't just sit home. And being part of the process also means voting by mail. There are study after study, University of Arizona, Heritage, et cetera, that show that mail-in voting is safe and secure, that it is not susceptible to fraud. Our American military had been voting by mail since the Civil War. The President of the United States votes by mail. And to hear folks, including the President of the United States, chip away at our own democracy, it's incumbent on all of us, Democrats and Republicans, and that's why I said in my opening comments, there are Republicans like the former CIA director under President Bush, General Hayden, like Tom Ridge, former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, and President Bush's first Department of Homeland Security secretary, that have talked about mail-in voting is American, it is safe, it is secure, and that's why I'm co-chairing what's called Vote Safe PA here in our great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but Vote Safes across the whole country, but especially in the battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So we're pushing it out there through taking the Hill Pack and that cyber hygiene and letting folks know what they need to do to be safe, but also to be part of that process.
Okay.
And Adam, I think you're muted, brother.
Adam, you're still muted.
Oh, shoot. It's not like we haven't been doing this for 5 months now. Secretary Hobbs, what keeps you up at night? What gives you confidence? Sort of, how are you approaching this on a day-to-day basis in preparing for this election?
Really, my biggest concern is the issue of misinformation, and I think that we are dealing with that as effectively as possible here. And I think what I have seen is so many voters kind of just take this into their own hands. Like, we're not going to stand for this. We're not going to let someone steal our elections. And I have so much confidence in them. You know, the whole purpose of misinformation campaigns is to undermine our democratic institutions. It's to undermine people's confidence and dissuade participation. And if people say, we're not going to be dissuaded, you can't take this from us, then we're winning. And that's really what bolsters my confidence. I also need to give a shout out, despite all of the partisan rhetoric that we are facing with this election, vote by mail, everything that the president is saying that is going to happen to make this election not valid. We have election officials across the state who are both elected and appointed. They are elected Democrats, they are elected Republicans, they are appointed by elected Democrats and Republicans, and they are focused on conducting elections that have integrity, that are secure, that are safe. and that are accurate, and they are staying above the partisan fray and working really hard to do their jobs and making sure that we're protecting democracy. That makes my job so much. It's not an easy job, but being able to work in partnership with these officials has really been what's gotten us through this pandemic. And we had a successful presidential preference election in March and a successful primary last week because of those partnerships and those really outstanding election officials across the state.
Thank you, Secretary. Melissa, any closing thoughts?
Sure. Well, I am happy to be the partisan person on this panel. And I will say again that the Trump re-election, they're doing this because they think they cannot win in a free and fair election. I want to emphasize again, they're doing this because they believe they cannot win if the election is free and fair. One thing that I know is the MAGA coalition, they've always been over amplified, but also they are smaller than they were 4 years ago. You can see it online. And I think part of the reason there is increased conspiracy content is because they have lost their so-called moderating influences, as much of a moderating influence they ever had. I will repeat my call from the beginning, which is there are so many knowns in terms of the kinds of disinformation they will employ about the legitimacy of this election. And as much as you can do now to emphasize that narrative with your networks, and especially with local and national media outlets, with your social media power, please do so, because I think that is the most important thing that we can do from a disinformation standpoint to assure the legitimacy of this election.
Thank you, Melissa. And I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Gabe Rosenberg for pulling this all together. I look forward to seeing many of you across the final 2 days of this conference. Please dive into as much of this content as possible. Join us for pub quiz tonight if you can, but really, we wish we could all be together in Denver, but let's make the best of this that we can, and let's go out and win in November. So thank you all very much for for being here, and wish you well. Stay safe.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Bye,
Great job.
everyone.